Hello and welcome to another week of Bible study. Today we'll be talking about the story of Isaac, yet again, but part two. So hopefully you guys are ready for this, and let's get it started.
All right. Give me about 1 second. Trying to get this up. Can you guys see the presentation yet?
No. Well, I don't see it on my end, but
Yeah, I don't see it either.
Okay. Today it wants to give me the technical difficulties.
there you go. I see it now.
Okay, good. So like I said, we're going to jump into the second part of the Isaac story. If you remember last week, we focused more on the beginning of Isaac's story and how he was chosen, pretty much living up living out Abraham's blessing, and how he found his wife, the well moment, things like that. So we went over a lot of things last week that were pertinent to the pieces that were placed in the ground, per se, like the well, and the way that God showed the faith coming to fruition, especially through prayer, and how those elements work together. So this week, we're going to go into another aspect of it. Like I said, we're going to go over the culture and how some of the biggest beef in the world that has literally shaped what is going on around us economically, race, spiritually, just everything, how that kind of comes and stems from this main story right here. So, any questions from anybody before we get started?
No.
No.
Okay. So, without further ado, let's get it rolling. I think I went too far. Okay, here we go. So, returning back to our story. So, last slide that we had, we left on Rebecca meeting Isaac and falling in love. And we seen how she protected herself and she covered herself because that's not typically what would happen in their culture. So, she had to kind of arrange to make sure that things are still respected. Um, the tone in the chapter is still a tone of grief. But after this chapter, we start seeing the way that the chapters are being written. They tend to go back to being the neutral tone that we're used to. The last couple of weeks, we briefly talked about marriage and its significance with their culture, on how it kind of ties up everything. But today, we're actually going to dive into the actual concept of marriage and why it's important and why it kind of changes the story for whoever is getting married, to who's going to be born, and where that lineage would lead to Jesus coming in the future. So this is where all of that is important. So first things first, we have what we call coming of age and marriage. Okay, so when we get into this part of the Bible, we don't have any big things set up yet. As you see, I'm going to talk about the bar and bat mitzvah. We don't necessarily have that yet because the Jewish culture has not started. However, the pre ceremonies and pre traditions start here, and how most ancient civilizations all had a coming of age ceremony, and then they also had a way that they did their marriages, that do not look nothing like what we have today. Marriage today is kind of comical when you look at it from what we do today versus what they did back then. Um, the coming of age. So in ancient Hebrew culture, boys and girls transitioned into adulthood through learning and religious observance. Although there was no formal ceremony like the bar and bat mitzvah back then, boys were considered adults around the age of 13 and girls around the age of 12. What that meant was it came with increased responsibilities in religion and in the family life. Usually around 12 and 13 for the girls, and guys, that's when they would hit puberty, which is why it was so important to do the ceremony of coming into age at that time. If you hit it too late, now lust has become an issue for that child. And since there was nothing in place to kind of keep people from being promiscuous, kind of like today we have cameras, you need a car to go somewhere. You couldn't just venture out on your own. Back then, there wasn't any of those type of safeguards. If you wanted to leave, you wanted to leave. Unless your parents said no, that was it. So most boys were able to just get up and walk out whenever they felt like it, especially after the age of 13. Marriage was formal. Most of the time it was arranged, and we've gone over that. It was a contract between families marked by a betrothal period, payment of the bride price, and a marriage ceremony with a feast. It was both a social and religious institution with defined roles for men and women, emphasizing family continuity, offspring, and household management. There's a whole bunch of fancy words for saying they're trying to keep everything within the family. They're trying to make sure that that family line, which was important, from Abraham all the way down, the goal was to now bring the future, that promised seed that's supposed to crush the head of the serpent, into the world. So when the whole concept of marriage and other things like that started, we get a very big and very constructed overview of what marriage was supposed to be. So now we'll go into the coming of age in marriage. So before I continue with the coming of age for the bar and bat mitzvah, one thing we need to understand, even though bar and bat mitzvah is towards the Jewish culture, but since we haven't even became Jews yet in our story, we're still just Hebrews. We have to understand every ancient civilization, every native, every type of islander, anybody who came from a proto-civilization, a pre-civilization, or an older and ancient. Yes, Stefan.
I just had a question just because you were saying, I mean, that makes sense. Just um, the Jewish religion wasn't created yet. What religions in Genesis 24, is that where we're starting right now? Genesis 24?
Yes, and going into 25.
So, right. So, what religions were, like, I guess the ones that were known at the time? Is it just, um, well, yeah, that's my question, I guess. So,
Now, I
just the
got you.
Hebrews and I don't.
So that's actually a wonderful question, because usually people don't really think about it. We just assume at this time that they were Jews already. But when you start to understand that the Jewish culture doesn't start till a lot later, back then they would refer, excuse me, back then they would have referred to themselves as the children of Abraham, and they would have served Abraham's God, which is where you get those texts where they said the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, the God of Israel. That's how they referred to it, because up to this point, religion wasn't necessarily a thing. It was, in a sense, closer towards spirituality. We have a deity that we serve. Whatever that deity asks of us is what we follow. But as we realize with Adam and Eve, going all the way down to Noah, we realize oral religion is one thing, and it's one thing to pass on the stories and tell everybody else about what has happened, but we start to realize that it's not enough. People will still sin, so you need more structure, and that's how we end up getting to organized religion later on. But at this point right now, it's just whoever is in your family they follow what you follow. So anybody after Abraham, they refer to God as the God of Abraham.
Oh, wow. I didn't even know that. Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
So
Okay,
as
yeah.
and you'll start to see it like when we start going through the next chapters for the next couple weeks, you're gonna see other people who look at the children of Abraham and all the other descendants that'll say, "Oh, you guys are the people who serve the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob," and that's how they refer to it because there's no other way to say it because there is no organized religion yet.
All right. Thanks for clearing that up. Makes sense.
No problem, no problem. So, um, when we get to the coming of age, like I said, every older civilization, city, town, tribe has a ceremony where you're going into your adulthood. And we could say for various movies, various video games, you know that there's always like the trial or the test to kind of, if you can pass this test, you'll be a man, or you can get married, or you can do this, or you can do that to leave the tribe. Every culture has one. So it wasn't just for them. But the reason why was there had to be a marker to show that children have now changed from children and have become adults. Just because the child has gone through puberty does not qualify them as an adult. So how do you make that, that change and actually understand that they're ready to not only have kids but also bring in the next generation and keep everything afloat? So this is where you get those tests. This is where you get you got to get through the mountain and recite these words, and if you can remember it and pass this test and the mountain chooses you, you're a man. All these different cultures have their different spins on whatever their test should be, but what it is essentially an IQ test, a physical test, or physical assessment, and pretty much a mental assessment in a sense of, does this person have the maturity needed to bring in the next community, the next generation, the next group of us, and make sure everything's okay. So we still have that till this day. Right now, that is what we have as school. School can be used as one of those markers. When you get through school, you have a degree, you're usually considered an adult. When you get to college, you got your degree, you're considered more advanced as an adult, you're smarter. I can trust that person because I know they can take care of their finances, they can take care of this and take care of that. Those degrees and those markers on if you graduate or if you made it to the next step usually tell other people that you're ready to take on more commitments, more responsibilities, so on and so forth, my bad. And so because there wasn't organized school back then, you start to realize that no matter how time may change, we always have things that kind of assess where we are as people, both boys and girls. Um, but going back towards this era, before we get the bar and bat mitzvah, this is what kind of led to what the Jews use to today. Boys, they would be considered for adulthood once they get to the ages of 13 to about 16. They had to demonstrate that they can take on the responsibilities in the community, help build, help, go work, whatever their trade was. No matter what was going on, they had to show that they were capable. They had to already be in puberty. So if you're a late bloomer, you could not actually start up in the next phase. But once you started to go through puberty, at least now you are considered eligible, not just for marriage, but to ask to move out, to ask to be your own person. If you want to change your trade that you've been following, this is the time that you, in a sense, change to go to a new job that you are considering. And this is where you would start to become your own person. Same thing for the girls. Once they hit their puberty, they reach their milestones of maturity around 12 to 16, again, around that same age. So for them to be considered eligible for marriage and for being able to bring kids into this world, of course, you need to be able to have your period. That's first and foremost. But for you to be given the right to actually do that, you need to show the maturity, which means cleaning, cooking, taking care of kids, understanding what is necessary for a kid whenever they're crying, how to tend to them, how to clean them, put clothes on them properly and make sure that they're taken care of. So there wasn't necessarily, like I said, this is the pre. So there wasn't anything that literally became this is it and that's that for the bar and bat mitzvah. But the bar mitzvah was for the boys, the bat mitzvah was for the girls. So eventually this became or end up evolving into a ceremony for the boys, which would take place about now 16 years old. And they would have to be able to recite the commandments, the Torah, by mouth, be able to read it, be able to pray, pretty much be the priest of their own household, and of course go through puberty. Now they're able to be called a man and be able to get married. So now they can go to their father and say, hey, I need a wife. And their father would go find them a wife. And for girls in their bat mitzvah, they were able to do the same once they went through puberty. They could demonstrate that they could take care of a kid, take care of a household, cook, do all the services of a housewife. And now they could say, hey, when they're able to read out loud the commandments, or at least recite them as well, or understand them, since now the reading is for now. Back then they weren't really permitted to read, but once they could understand and take leadership from a man and not fight back and be submissive, they were able to say, hey, dad, mom, I want to be married, or I want to be somebody's wife. And now they become a candidate for the next person in the village who's going to become married. If it will go to the next slide. Sorry, guys. There we go. All right. So we went from the coming of ages. Now we're going to the marriage practices. To get married in ancient times, you had to go through first your coming of age ceremony. If you didn't go through that, there was no way you could have marriage. And if you started messing with somebody, you were being promiscuous before times, as a woman, you would get stoned. So there really wasn't a way for you to try to get out of it, because you would bring shame on your family. As a man, they would exile you from your community. The only way that the woman would not get stoned is if she committed to actually being a prostitute at that point. So she would, yes.
So the woman has had to die and the man got to leave his family. Is that what you just said?
Yeah, so no, there's
Wow.
there's been times, hold on. There's been times where the man did get executed as well. But because the man was supposed to be the one to lead in, and they usually got the blessing from their father,
Gotcha.
that's like Isaac doing pretty much getting a child before he was supposed to have Jacob and Esau.
Mhm.
If he did that, he would have got pushed out of the land, but he would still have that blessing because it was already given to him. So that's why they didn't kill the sons, because that's where their lineage had to go through. But the women, you only had two options. Most, they would either stone her to death, or she would be sent to the brothel down the street, and she would now have to live her life as a prostitute until somebody in the community gets her pregnant, and now they have to actually marry her and take her as their wife, whether it be a second, third, or fourth. Yeah.
Wow, that's a lot. Okay.
Yeah, it was pretty tough. Pretty tough. But that's the reason why they had these things in place, so that way people wouldn't have to live out these grim lives. Go through your adulthood ceremony. Once you do that, now if you really want to marry, do what's required of you and ask your parents, ask for the blessing, and then be patient, and you will be married. which is why we have people getting married at the ages of 12, 13. If you look at Mary, Jesus' mother, she was 12 when she had Jesus. It wasn't uncommon for them to have kids at such a young age because the idea was if you can give them what lust is trying to take from them at a younger age in their innocence and let them go through it together, not only do they stay married longer, they don't try to go find it with nobody else because they're still kind of shy and still coming into their own sexuality, their own bodies. They grow with that person. They tend to lean on that person and tend to stay with that person. So now when it gets to 25, 30 years, 40 years later, they don't want to go find nobody else. They've already built their life and their kids. Usually they would have about 7 to 8 kids at this time. They've already well established. They're taken care of. The family's been moving. What's the point of breaking things up now? And then by the time you look at it, their kids are already starting to have their own kids 12 years later. So it put things into order and perspective to keep the families together and to keep the community together, but still close and tight knit. So like I said, to get married back then, you would have to go through your ceremony first. So you have to successfully become an adult. After you get that blessing from your parents, marriages were usually arranged by the families. So whether the father would go find another family in the community, or they would already know from the priest that, hey, so and so's first daughter is ready to be married. His second daughter is ready to be married as well, and third, fourth, whatever. And now people already know, not the children, because they're not permitted to see each other, so that way lust doesn't get them. The parents know, so now they can make, she might make a good match for my son, or he might make a good match for my daughter. And at that point, they can kind of come together and build that contract in a sense. So alliances, family honor, people who were richer, wealthier, people who share the same religious beliefs, people who have a same common ancestor. And that's what kind of led the marriages to come together. And now you would actually say, okay, boom, you're going to marry so-and-so because they're related to Abraham, just like us. Cool. We have the same grandmother. Cool. Oh, they have more money, status. Cool. And because of that, oh, they're into the same religion as us, so we're gonna marry them. And it was never a problem. Today, we get a lot of issues because we have people who say, I don't want to be in an arranged marriage, it's not fair. I can't marry for love. Marriage from the conception of time all the way up until the Greek and Roman empires, love was never the basis for marriage. We're talking about almost 1,200 years into the Common Era. Love was never the reason for marriage. You got married because you wanted to control your lust, because you don't want to give yourself over to fornication and every other sin out there. You got married because you wanted kids. You got married because you wanted to build an empire. You got married because you wanted to continue to pass on your religion and pass on your inheritance to the next. Or you got married because you wanted to join into another family to build up your wealth or your status. So when people say, oh, I don't want to get married, it's because nowadays we have the choice. And that choice has polluted the sanctity of what marriage is. And courtship. Courtship is funny because I actually talked to a friend about this one the other day. Courtship was not exactly what people think it is. Courtship is the process of somebody who's already gone through a manhood or womanhood ceremony and saying, I want to be married. But once you say, I want to be married, you just need a partner. You don't ask for nothing else. Courtship is asking for a partner. Most people don't realize when you ask for a partner, you don't say, hey, I want a tall partner, I want a skinny partner, or I want somebody with long hair and curls or blue eyes or this and that. That's not courtship. Courtship is between two people who intend to get married. And once they meet each other or they do get to that point, they're going to get married. There's no if and buts about it. That's courtship. But courtship today has become so plagued, again, because of lust and perversion and the fact that we get to choose and date. Courtship does not exist in the modern day anymore. So when people say, I want to be courted, it's impossible to be courted when you can test drive a relationship. Dating somebody is test driving. I get to take whatever you're offering me, whether it's we're just holding hands or we're having kids before marriage. I get to test drive you, and when I get bored or if I don't want to purchase this car, I can bring it back to the dealership and go get another one. Courtship does not work in that. For courtship, it is a commitment from both sides, and then they enter into courtship with each other, and then they get married. That's how it works. There is no, oh, I wanted somebody who was tall, or I wanted somebody who was muscular or skinny. No, it's I wanted a partner. So I found somebody who fit that role, and that was it. Now, the process of marriage back then, before courtship starts, which doesn't happen till the Greek era, anyways. You had the first process of it after your womanhood or manhood ceremony, betrothal, which is the engagement. So in ancient times, the process of marriage began with a formal engagement called the betrothal or the kedushin. Once a couple was betrothed, they were considered legally married. Even though they didn't live together or even see each other, they're already considered for each other. It's like, and this is where that whole term, that person's spoken for, comes from. The betrothal period could last up to a year or more. Just depends on how you're trying to get everything set up, depending on what's the agreement for the marriage. But you're preparing for the final part of the marriage, which is most cases the bride and the groom never see each other until the end of the marriage, which is in the tent. So this is literally right after. So assume that I go through a manhood ceremony. Now I'm in my city or in my town. I am considered the new man or the new guy who has become a man in the city. Cool. Me being 14 years old, I say, hey, Dad, I want a wife. At this point, he goes downtown. He goes to the city square, talks to the priest, talks to some of his friends. He finds out that one of them has a daughter around the same age as me, and she has just gone through her ceremony as well. He says, hey, does your daughter, is she looking for a husband? Boom, she is. Cool. I've seen her before. I think she would make a great wife for my son. I would like my son to marry your daughter. They would talk about it. If they both came to agreement, both parents, now by law, I'm already married. So I can't do anything with nobody else. I can't ask for anybody's hands in marriage. I'm already spoken for, both me and her. We have not seen each other, but we are already spoken for. And as I said, this period could last anything from a week all the way up to more than a couple years. It just depends on how long it takes to prepare. Reason why it prepares is because of the second portion, which is called the bride price or the mohar. The bride price is paid by the groom's family, and it's to ensure. So it's kind of like insurance to say, hey, we're giving you this money so you know that we mean and intend to take care of your daughter. Our son is going to stay married to her, and if it doesn't happen, not only will we pay you double this price afterwards, but you'll get your daughter back, and we will not take another day of her time. So we still have cultures in Africa that still do bride prices, because what that does is it shows that the man or his family is financially stable enough to take care of her and any kids that she may have within that marriage. So no matter, even if they got divorced or he died and she became a widow, there's enough money there to make sure those kids will be taken care of for the rest of their lives. So once this portion, the second portion, gets settled, now the engagement can continue. And this is what made it go past a year or more sometimes because the person had to go and work to make sure they can pretty much give that deposit. So after the betrothal period, the final marriage ceremony, known as the nisuan, would take place. The groom would come to the bride's home or her family's village, accompanied by a festive procession. Mind you, he is not permitted to see her, so she would usually be covering herself up with a veil, or she would be in the bride's room, and you would never get a chance to actually see her. You might hear her voice, she might sing, but you won't get to see her face to face. Once the festive procession starts, it's followed by a wedding feast, which could last up to a week. Once the feast is done, and now you've partied with the family, you've met the father, he's given you his blessing. At the same time, they're preparing the wife for her to consummate the marriage, which is to lay with you for the first time. She's getting married, or she's getting ready. They're giving her a ceremonial bath. They're making sure her she looks good, she feels good, feels comfortable. After this week is over with, she would now go to a tent, which would be either behind their house or in the city square, and everybody would leave the tent alone. She would go in, she would put a lamp outside or a candle outside. When she was ready to finally become his wife by consummation, she would blow out the candle, and that would be the signal. So this is what they call the candle watch. Or if you hear sometimes they say the watch party, the night watch party. This is what that is. So the whole family is waiting for her to do that. And once they do that, they pretty much hype the man up and they say, it's time, go. And he will travel now down this road to this tent, or to the backyard to this tent. And he would go in, and since there's no lights, he doesn't get to see her face. But he lays with her. Most of the time, they would become pregnant on the first night. He would lay with her, and when he wakes up in the morning and opens up the tent, he will see the face of his wife for the first time. Now, a lot of people think, but what if she is not what I want? What if I don't think she looks beautiful? What if she doesn't think he looks beautiful? Those things never came up to their minds because, again, social media has polluted us to this day. We weren't meant to see as many people as we see on a daily basis. A lot of these ideas and images that we have in our heads, they were never corrupted by these. So once they got a chance to meet their wife or husband for the first time, they usually stayed married. Again, you got to realize that they were younger. So the necessity or the need to want to go find another partner or be promiscuous or want to see what options you have was never in their mind. And even if they did come, because it would be such a shame because of all the work the family has put in to get you guys together, you wouldn't want to do that because now you would disappoint your family. And it would, if anything, it would bring on a curse. If you're the girl, you might die. If you're the guy, you might get kicked out of the community. And nobody wants that to happen. Any questions before I move forward?
No, I don't have any. Well, it's just like because it's just the complete opposite. Like I didn't even know marriage was like came to this level. And yeah, like you said, we're all corrupt, and that's what I was thinking. Were they gonna be like, hey, this isn't what I was expecting? But um, you explained it how like we're all corrupted with social media and um how many people we see on a daily basis and all these you know models on whatever you want to say. You know what I'm saying? So like, yeah, it makes sense of what you were saying. I had questions and then you answered it when you kept going.
Okay,
Yeah.
understood. And just to piggyback off of what you just said, though, you're right. A lot of people, the reason why they always have a second opinion and I want to try something else is because you have an image in your head. I want somebody tall, dark, and handsome. Where does that come from? Most people have the same fantasy about what they want in a woman or in a man because of what we've been exposed to in social media, the movies, magazines, just in our
Yeah,
daily
exactly.
lives.
Yeah.
So it's created or curated an image for you. So even if they were to try to arrange a marriage for you, you would protest against it because what you believe it should look like doesn't match your reality. But in the fact of the matter is, nobody's reality is usually what you see on TV. And then we spend half of our lives getting into our 30s, 40s, realizing that true love or what a marriage should look like is not what's been in the movies or in social media. And so now you have a lot of people either settling or finally finding true love or so on and so forth.
Yeah, yeah. That's true. I agree.
So back then, this process of marriage and the process of coming into your manhood or womanhood ceremony was important to all cultures, regardless of religion, because it kept the image of Adam and Eve and exactly how marriage started. It keeps it the same way. If it worked for them, why would you change the formula? Why would you add something else into another element? To be married, man and woman, they didn't know each other originally. Adam woke up and Eve was there. That's his wife. He didn't get to choose somebody who's taller, skinnier, long hair. He didn't get to. Eve didn't get to say, well, I want somebody tall, dark, and handsome. That was my partner. I needed a partner fit for me. And once I awoke, once I finished praying, once I finished asking, the person that was given to me is my partner. So I respect that and I accept that because now I'm trusting my father or my parent, my guardian, kind of like God, to give me somebody who's fit for me. So, with that being said, moving forward, in these marriages, the roles of the man in marriage, they're men and women in the marriage. So, the husband's role, and this is just to simplify it, the husband role was responsible for providing for the wife. So before he gets married, it's already understood that he can provide for the wife no matter what he does, which included finding the food or getting the food, clothing, shelter. He was expected to contribute to the family line by having children. So there was no, I don't feel like having kids, or kids is not what I want. I don't really like kids. Uh-uh. There was no such thing. If that was the case, you would not be qualified to get married. That was something they would have already checked when you were going through your manhood ceremony. If you don't want kids, you can either leave or go become a man by yourself out in the wilderness. So that's where the big emphasis on having sons comes up as well, because that's the person who's going to take over your family line and continue it on. And the wife's role was to manage the household and bear those children. So you couldn't have somebody who was, oh, I don't feel like having more kids, or, this, that, and that was never even a thought in their head. Most of these women wanted to bear as many kids as possible because the more kids they had, the better their status. The city would pay them for having more kids because that means if our Savior, well, as far as the Hebrews go, if our Savior comes from one of your lines, you become this famous person. You become somebody who's infamous because they're coming from your bloodline. So if a woman was barren, kind of like Sarah and Rebecca are, or I should say Sarai before Sarah, um, it could lead to issues in the marriage. So the husband might take a second wife, might have a concubine, or use the midwife or the servant that his wife may have. So we're looking about Hagar and Sarah's situation with Abraham. So that's in Genesis 16. If the wife is barren, usually there's an understanding that her maid servant usually would have been her best friend that was raised with her, or if she did have a slave, that they always go with them. So when they get married, they have somebody to go with them. That person is going to help them when they have kids. So If she has a son, a daughter, while they're resting and trying to get back to being themselves, the midwife or the maid wife will take care of all the household duties for them. But at the same time, they also know that they have the option. Once the wife gets her son, so if, for example, in Sarah's situation, since she couldn't have any kids, the maid wife, Hagar, would be the one to have the kid for her. Her first son would become Sarah's son by law. Now, if Hagar wanted to leave afterwards, she has the right to. But more than likely, she would have asked, hey, can you give me a child? And she's allowed to ask for children until she has her own son as well. So that way her bloodline can continue. So one of the things, it was a double-edged sword. When the husband would marry a wife, if he had enough money and he wanted her servant, maid wife, or even her little sister sometimes to come and live with them to take that role, he also had to fulfill that role to her as well. And if he was not okay with that, then he could not accept that maid wife to come with them. They would just have to acquire a slave after they get married, where they would now get out of that agreement. And it's also contributed to one of the issues that we have today, where people think polygamy is a thing that happened in the Bible, and oh, people are this polygamist and they just love to have multiple wives and so on and so forth. And that's not the case. Again, it was a contract. They understood once they had that child, they were going to take their son. So if they had daughters, the daughters would stay there, become more servants. Once they got their son, they're leaving. And it was simple as that. So when we look at it today, it's bad theology why people believe that, oh yeah, he had multiple wives, so that's what I want. It's bad theology, and it's a bad example because people don't really read their Bible. So they don't understand what was going on back then. So options in marriage. And so we're going to go over the polygamy real quick. Having multiple wives and concubines were practiced in ancient Hebrew culture. Now, again, asterisk right there. It was practiced only in the regards of having a contract. And when I say contract, people who had money were the ones who were able to have this happen. So men like Abraham, Jacob, David would have multiple wives or concubines for the purpose of bringing more children or to take care of their wife who may be barren. But like I said, what's viewed as polygamy today is not what it was used for in the past. People weren't just having multiple wives just for the sake of, I just want options. That was never the case. Divorce. Divorce was absolutely not a thing. However, in the case that you wanted to get divorced, it was a process. So while married, divorce was permitted only if the man initiated it. He had to find something displeasing to him about the wife, meaning she was out in the streets or she was barren. And yes, I know being barren is a reason to get divorced, a legal reason. Which is why the girls or the women agreed to the contract of letting their servants be able to sleep with their husbands to have their own kids, so that way they can have a kid by law, and that way they wouldn't be shamed by being sent home in a divorce, because then that means that family would lose that money in that contract. Like I said, it came with serious social and financial consequences for the women and her family. So it was discouraged for both husbands and women to not get divorced. If you could deal with it, deal with it. And this is the reason why, if the man was starting to be displeased with the wife, he pushed her to the side and just got another wife. And this is where the polygamy might become an issue, but again, it wasn't just for the pure fact of having options. It was more for a reason something is not being taken care of at the house. My wife is barren. I need somebody that can give me a son so I can continue my lineage. Once the men had their sons, most of the time, yes, Stefan.
Was it just like I hear about, when Abraham's wife was barren, Sarai, um, and then you talk about, uh, I think, did you say? I'm not sure if you said Isaac's wife was barren too.
Yes, Rebecca was.
Yeah, Rebecca. So, was this a common thing for women to be barren, back during these times, like, or
From
maybe,
certain
or maybe
families.
even like, because just in general, maybe it's like, because I don't really know the statistics with that. Maybe, um, I don't. I just like honestly haven't don't even think about it all that often. Women that are barren and like, that's a real thing. And so I don't know if I don't know if it was more prevalent then or more happened more often at that time, because I just been hearing it, or you, well, with those two wives, and then just you saying that's the reason why the polygamy thing and your wife was barren or whatever the case is. That was just a question that popped in my head with during that time.
That's a wonderful question. Like I said, it's the barren thing is actually genetic. You'll if you realize Rebecca is actually a descendant of Sarah. In her family, it was common for them to be barren. But you'll start to realize even till today, most families that have people who are barren, they might have somebody else in their family who's barren as well. It's genetic. So even though now we have options to kind of fix some of those problems for certain people, it might just be that they have to take the IVF treatments to have a baby, and they're not truly just 100% barren. But back then you wouldn't be able to tell that because medicine wasn't as far as it is or advanced as it is today. So,
Okay, okay, that makes sense. Yeah. Okay,
but yes,
thanks.
no problem. But when you look at in the Bible and a lot of different texts from Egyptian text and even Mesopotamian text, you'll hear of a lot of women who are barren, which is why you see a lot of people have multiple wives just for the simple fact of, hey, I'm gonna give my first wife because I actually do love her. I've been married to her since we were 12 years old. I'm 25 now. I've been with her for over 12 years. I want to still have a child with her. So her little sister's here and she's not barren. When we have a baby, if it's a son, that child becomes hers. And so me and my wife would have our quote unquote our first child, our first son. So she can name that child, she gets to raise that child. She'll feel like a mother in that sense. And this is why you didn't really hear of divorce back then as much. But the barren thing was an actual prevalent issue.
Okay, I see.
Understood. So yes, divorce was discouraged. It was, like I said, it was a bad look for the woman because if the woman came home and she was divorced, most of the time she would never be married again in the rest of her life. If she didn't have any kids by that time, she would just be sold out to either the brothel or she would just become a slave. And that would be the end of her life. So it became something that nobody wanted to deal with. So again, kind of forced people to just kind of deal with the having the multiple wives just only for the simple fact of I don't want to bring no shame back to my family. And if you get divorced, whatever money that was put as a down payment for you has to go back. So if your family already used it, they got to sell you back into slavery to pay for that debt. And so it it became a whole mess that nobody wanted to deal with. Marriage was also a covenant. It had religious significance and it was because of a blessing of offspring as well. So, like we said, marriage in the Hebrew culture was not just a social contract, but it had religious significance. It was viewed as God's plan for a family and community building. This union between husband and wife was seen as a reflection of the covenant between God and Israel, but also reframing the picture of Adam and Eve. So here we go again, talking about it. Adam went to sleep, woke up, Eve was there. She's part of me. She was made from me. I don't get to choose whether she's ugly or beautiful or tall or skinny, short, whatever. I wanted a wife. I wanted a partner. God seen that I was struggling being alone by myself. So I asked for her and I got her. That's all that matters. I can grow to love her, not because I see, oh my gosh, she's beautiful, I love her, love at first sight. No, that's a Greco-Roman myth, infatuation, which turns into lust. The issue of love is if I already have love from my family and from God, I can share that same love with her. As long as she does her role and I do my role, we will always love each other. She respects me as a man. It makes me feel like I'm the king of the house when I walk in. I'm going to feel that love. It isn't her saying, I love you. But because she does that, I feel like I'm on top of the world. I am at peace. So now I come home and I give her a confidence. Oh, you look good today. Not a confident compliment. You look good today. Oh, the food tastes great today. You really put your foot in that food today. That nurturing that I give her emotionally makes her feel loved. And once that cycle goes back and forth, that's what you call true love in the ancient sense of it, the religious sense of it, the spiritual sense of it, the emotional sense of it, and the mental sense of it. I can't say physical because the physical will lead you down the path of lust. But again, even if you want to say physical in the sense of what we call today love languages, there's only two. The man needs respect and the woman needs nurturing. As long as that is continuous, it's a flowing circle that's going to always renew itself over and over again. She respects him, puts him on top of everything. He's always going to come back and feeling like I need to make sure that she feels good. I need to make sure I compliment her. I need to make sure that she's on top of everything. And then she's going to continue with that. Oh, he thought of me today. I'm going to go make sure his food is good. I'm going to make sure his clothes is ironed. I'm going to make sure he feels like he's the king of this domain when he walks through the house. And that was the whole reason for not letting the kids choose their partner, but instead arranging a partner for them. Still trying to keep it synonymous with the way God did it with Adam and Eve. Now, the other point of that covenant, remember, you always need three things from that covenant. These are the other two, besides the promise of wanting to be married. It's the offspring. So one of the key purposes of marriage was always to have children. They were seen as a blessing from God, and having a son was important because they would carry the family name and inheritance. So now, that was the marriage. Coming into manhood and the womanhood ceremonies. The reason why we had to go over that first before we get back into the chapter, from here on forward, we're going to see that a lot of cultural cues come into it, and it kind of determines how somebody is moving forward in the community. If that person doesn't have a wife, if that person's husband is dead, and so on and so forth, all these things matter. And if you don't understand why they're getting married or why this person had multiple wives, now it just starts to look like, oh, polygamy is a thing, or anybody could just have anybody at any given moment. So wanted to reframe it for you so that way it made more sense. So getting back to Genesis 25, verse 1, we have Abraham getting remarried. Up until this point, Abraham has still been depressed after Sarah died. The beginning of this chapter is written in a context that shows that grief is still there, but it's starting to be soothed and go away. So the same way that we see the last chapter speak about Isaac and Rebekah and how he's at peace, she filled the void for him. This is the same way that this text is written for Abraham when he gets remarried to this woman named Keturah. So, as I said, the tone here is showing Abraham beginning to find happiness in another person. Keturah bore 6 kids, 6 sons to Abraham: Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. Medan and Midian's descendants actually become one tribe later on, but each son becomes a great nation, fulfilling the promise that Abraham would be the father of many nations. Pretty much everywhere from Egypt all the way into Minor Asia, all those are Abraham's descendants at the end of the day. He by himself pretty much fathers all these great nations, all up into the Egyptian pharaohs that Moses deals with later on, all descendants of Abraham. But that also gives us an issue that we still deal with today's world. So Abraham loved all his sons. However, Isaac had the blessing from God, so he only gave each one of his sons gifts. Pretty much, again, they're rich. So he gives them all gifts to make sure that they can take care of themselves, and he sent them off. And sadly, like I said, the issue with this is because how they take over the whole Arabian Peninsula, all the way into Minor Asia and back into Egypt, all those lands have a claim that they're a descendant of Abraham. Isaac is the promised one who has the claim of the promised land. However, they feel that they have a share in that as well, because if Abraham's my father and Isaac's my brother, why can't I? And this is where we have so much animosity from the Jewish culture and the Islamic cultures, because everybody that comes out of Isaac either becomes Jewish or Christian. Anybody who comes out of Ishmael or the other 6 sons turn into Islamic countries. So now they're warring between each other. Keturah, as who she is, she's an interesting person. She actually does get mentioned multiple times in the Bible. Her name means incense or fragrance. This could suggest that she was seen as a woman of good character, with her name symbolizing purity or virtue. But in some other Jewish texts, people actually believe that she is actually Hagar. She's come back, and because Abraham didn't want to run into any issues, he changed her name to Keturah. But the reason why they think that it's Hagar coming back is because all her descendants, all 6 sons, literally run back to Ishmael afterwards and pretty much intermingle with all of his descendants as if they owed him an allegiance. Any questions?
What do you think? Like, you think that it's Hagar? That's a crazy. That's wild. What?
Honestly, I'll be quite honest with you. 75% of me believes it is Hagar. Just because I did read some of the text, and it's just like I said, with the alliance to the descendants of Ishmael, if Isaac was promised to be from him 12 tribes, 12 nations, 12 kings, and Ishmael was said he was going to have 12 princes, they literally go back to these 12 princes and pretty much pledge their allegiance, like, yeah, we're under you. These are 6 other brothers that could have become their own nations by themselves. Why would you run back to Ishmael? Unless he was your older brother, that you were closer to because you guys all share the same mother. And like I said, there's some other details in there that kind of point out that she may have been, because of where she came from, coming back from Egypt. Hagar was Egyptian. The person that she gave to Ishmael to marry to start his lineage was also Egyptian. And the rest
Oh,
of,
sheesh.
yeah. And so the rest of them become what you believe now today to be the Arabian people from the Middle East. Those are all of his descendants. So all those people looking way similar and looking alike also gives the cue that Hagar was the mother of all of them. She was also promised that her son was going to be a father of many nations as well, and a great nation. And here we see that promise being fulfilled. So personally, I do believe that Keturah was Hagar, and to save face, Abraham changed her name.
Wow. All right. Thanks for your answer. Yeah, it makes sense with what you
Like I
said.
said, it's a personal opinion. I can give you some other books to read, and you can come to your own conclusions with that. But like I said, it's very interesting the things that they say about Keturah, because everything about Keturah is just beautiful. She's this woman of virtue and purity, and Hagar wasn't a bad person. It was just the fallout between her and Sarah. And so it's like, okay, boom, to make sure that other people don't realize that you're a whole new person now. So there's
Okay.
that. So moving forward. So one of Keturah's sons, the two being Medan and Medon, they actually end up combining and becoming one group between them. So their descendants are the Midianites. You'll see the Midianites spoken about plenty of times in the Bible as we move forward. They're nomadic or semi-nomadic, moving between Arabia, Sinai, parts of modern day Jordan, pretty much in the Middle East. They practice polytheism, um, pretty much worshiping Baal. And when we start to see them come back into the story is in Exodus. When Moses fled from Egypt, he fled to Medan, and he married his wife, Zipporah, who is a Midianite. And this, her father, Jethro, he was a leader, a priest, and he's also a general. So he's also the person who actually taught Moses for the 40 years that he was away from Egypt before he went to go with the famous "Let My People Go" speech. And that's in Exodus 2, verses 15 to 22, and Exodus 18. Jethro taught him how to be a leader. He had a stutter. And because he had a stutter, he didn't think that he could lead people. But he was given the knowledge on how to lead effectively by Jethro. But after that, we get much later on down the road, the Midianites allied themselves with Moab, which, if you remember from a couple previous Bible studies, the Moabites being the descendants of Lot's, one of them, first Lot's daughter, they were already in opposition to Israel. They already had beef with them. Once they combined their forces together, the Midianites and the Moabs, they became one nation, and then eventually they just called themselves just Moabites altogether. But they became a big problem for the Israelites. Not only were they able to infiltrate the promised land, they also led the Israelites into idolatry. But yeah, one of their biggest issues is the conflict with the Israelites over the promised land. So, and remember when I mentioned last week about the camels, this is why the camel is such a big thing, because the camels came from the Midianites. When we have people who sell camels or caravans and trade routes, the Moabites, the Midianites, those are the ones who, if you wanted camels or you wanted that type of stuff, you had to go to them. It was exclusively through them. So if you had 12, kind of like Isaac's servant Eliezer had, you had to get it from the Moabites or the Midianites. It was also, if you had a camel, that means you had a great connection with them. You probably were somebody of status, because they weren't just giving camels out to anybody. Okay, as we move back into the chapter, Genesis 25, verse 7, we have Abraham dying at the age of 175. Isaac and Ishmael both come together to bury their father in the cave that he purchased to lay Sarah in, the cave of Machpelah. And what's actually beautiful here is Isaac and Ishmael, as brothers, still have a great relationship. And it only mentions Isaac and Ishmael, but the other brothers are there. But they are associated with Ishmael at this point, so they don't get mentioned because now they're following after Ishmael. Isaac is mentioned first in the verse before Ishmael because not because he's older, but because he's the one that was actually supposed to be alive, not Ishmael. So here is where we start to get the text actually changes the tone. So from the point of Ishmael getting there with Isaac, burying their father, everything is good. Once it mentions after they did the funeral and Isaac is getting his blessing, you start to see tension. And it uses a phrase in there that kind of pretty much says, in the sense of tension, or like tension in the air, Ishmael is a little frustrated with Isaac because God now transitions the blessing from Abraham to Isaac, and this is in verse 11. So we see that this verse is written with tension. Not only does this tension last past Isaac and Ishmael, but it is still what we're seeing today with the Palestinians in Israel. This is the same tension that has made it through generations all the way up to us today. And this is where it starts. Now, one thing I want to clarify here is because of sin, same thing with Adam and Eve, taking matters into your own hands when God already told you something to do, but you do it your own way, always has unintended consequences. It may not happen to you today. It may not happen to you tomorrow, but it can happen to you a year from now, 3 years from now. It may not happen in your lifetime, but it can come to your children, your generations to come. As we see, this tension is looming still to this day, where we have bombings happening every single day, and that's what's in the news. All from Abraham listening to Sarah in the first place to have Ishmael. Literally recreating the sin, Adam listening to Eve to eat the apple. And this is what I've been saying from before, the theme is still relevant. It's still going to be present. It's still going to keep coming up because this is what has made and shaped our lives, no matter how far away from it we have come. Before I continue, any questions?
Just real quick about the blessing, or the tension. The tension is because um God gave Abraham, or God gave Isaac the blessing.
Yes.
That's so Ishmael had it first. Is that what you're saying? And then
No.
or he just
Remember,
chose.
remember when Sarah, Chris, I'm gonna get to you right after. Remember when Sarai couldn't have a kid, and she said, "Take my servant Hagar and have a
Right,
baby
right,
with her. That will become my son." God pretty much told Abraham, "I never told you to go have a baby with anybody
right,
else.
right. Yeah, yeah.
I told you and Sarah would have a kid, but you didn't listen to me. You listened to your wife." Same thing Adam did. You listened to your wife. She told you to eat the fruit, you did it. Sarah told you to go sleep with that lady, you did it. And that's where the unintended consequences is the tension that's fostered between the two brothers. And
Oh, wow, that's wild. Okay.
because by law, Ishmael should have had the blessing first because he was the firstborn. But because it was never intended for him, it skips him and it goes straight to Isaac.
That
Yeah.
makes sense.
Chris,
Thanks.
no problem.
I think you answered my question because I was curious. Isaac was younger than Ishmael, and that tension was a sense of sounds like a mix of jealousy and entitlement on behalf of
Mm-hmm.
Ishmael.
Yep. And as you'll see, it's something, I mean, imagine you were raised, you were being told, hey, you're the firstborn. You already know in your culture that the firstborn always gets the inheritance, if not all of it, at least most of it. And here you go, just because God told your father you're illegitimate, you don't get anything.
Mm,
Growing up, you might understand it, which he did, but that doesn't mean that he didn't have any resentment in his heart for it, or he didn't feel any type of way.
right. He was paying for his father's sin.
Exactly. And that's where we see so many issues between the Jews and the Christians sitting on one side, and the Islamic people, the Muslims, sitting on the other side. And then you see those crusades, those religious wars. They're being fought in the Bible and in the medieval times. All these crusades were fought for the simple fact of Abraham's sin. That's literally all it was.
Wow. Wow. That
Yep.
I mean that makes a lot of sense. And I understand why Ishmael reacted the way he did, but as you said, it doesn't change the instruction that God gave.
Mm-hmm. And this is why I said it's very important when God gives you something or tells you something that you carry it out without doing what you feel like doing, without changing it. Because when we do that, we don't know how it's going to impact our future. We don't know how it's going to impact our tomorrow. We may not see it with our own two eyes, but our children may. Our grandchildren may see it. And if Abraham could see, he would realize that generations to come are still paying the price for that one sin. The same way, if Adam and Eve could see their first sin, the rest of the world is paying the price for. And that's how sin works. It's a stain that becomes really hard to remove. And even when you think it's removed, there's still a hint of it still there. And as the text implies, Isaac or Ishmael and Isaac didn't have any problems from brother to brother. They both end up dying in peace from each other, but their children, however, is who picks up the fight. So moving forward, we get Genesis 25, verses 12 to 18. We get the story of Ishmael, and it goes to Ishmael's death already. So we have Ishmael's 12 sons, the ones that God had promised to him and Hagar. We have Nebaioth, Kedar. The nation of Kedar, you'll see a lot all the way into the book of Isaiah. Adbeel, Mibzam, Mishham, Duma, Massa, Hadad, Tima, Jator, Naphish, and Kedema. Kedema is also another famous descendant of Ishmael. Kedar and Kedema are the two that you'll see a lot rehearsed in the Bible. The rest of them kind of get drawn out, but if you are Muslim, you'll actually know where they are today because they actually still keep their tribes still kind of labeled out in the Middle East. But these are the 12 princes who, once they realize that they're not kings and they're only princes, we start to see that they start to harbor this hatred towards the 12 tribes of Israel, which is not Isaac's kids, but Jacob's kids, which is the 12 that he has. One of the biggest things here is I just want to go back and remind you guys about Ishmael. Ishmael does become a leader, not necessarily a king, but he becomes a leader. And the place that he and his mother, once they left Abraham, that they went to was a city that didn't have any religious doings. They were just a people that followed strict rules. If you stole, your hand gets cut off. If you hurt somebody, they get the right to hurt you back. So it's pretty much a society for an eye for an eye. When Ishmael came and gave them, this is the God of Abraham, my father, this is what he's told us, this is how the blessings go, this is how this whole faith thing is working, they now start to adopt the same principles that the Jewish people follow, which is why, if you look at it, the religions are very similar. However, we start to see that things are certain facts and certain things are changed. So to them, Ishmael should have been the one that was blessed. And in most Muslim cases, Ishmael was the first prophet after Abraham. Since his father was a prophet, he was a prophet by proxy, and he was the father of Islam. And because of him, he is respected because of that. Now, Ishmael's descendants, they settled in the area between Egypt all the way up to Assyria. That's Genesis 25, verse 18. This region is part of the Arabian Desert, which includes modern day Saudi Arabia, Jordan, parts of Syria, pretty much everything in the Middle East. The Ishmaelites are known for their roles as traders, and you'll see them more in the future when you realize that the person who brought Joseph to Egypt when his brother sold him into slavery were his own cousins, the Ishmaelites. They played a key role in caravan trade routes. Like I said, if you were going to do any big trading, you had to know somebody that was part of Ishmael's family. So if you wanted spices, gold, or other goods from other places, exotic stuff, they're your people to see. And like I said, their influence extended across the Arabian Peninsula, all the way to Egypt, Mesopotamia, Minor Asia. That whole region was Ishmael, which is, if you look at it today, that whole region is still predominantly Muslim, the other side being Judaism. Ishmael's descendants were known for their nomadic Bedouin way of life, moving through the desert and living off trade, herding, and this was where it became a big problem for them, raiding. They would raid everywhere they went, so they would pillage a lot of cities, which is where now the fallout happens between Ishmael's descendants and Isaac's descendants, which is why you see in the city of Jerusalem, you have that wall that separate the Jews who pray on one side and you have the Muslims praying on the other. They had to separate themselves because they felt like, hey, I still get a chance of this promised land, but I don't want to deal with you pretty much. But for the sake of God, we'll just put this partition between us, and that's how we'll deal with each other. The relationship between the descendants of Ishmael and Isaac is complex. Both were sons of Abraham. The descendants often found themselves in conflicts for their territories and the religious differences. Okay. Whereas a lot of the Hebrew children were very relaxed when it came to God in their relationship with Him, Ishmaelites were very strict about everything that they did. So, which is where, and I hate to say it this way, but this is where we get the whole term and the stereotype of extremist, because that was something that actually, again, started back then because it was an eye for eye type of community. And that kind of led them to be very strict on everything that they do. So in Islam, Ishmael is significant, like I already said, but he was also believed to be the one that was sacrificed, or that Abraham was supposed to sacrifice, not Isaac. God told Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, but in their story, after Abraham is buried, when they go back to now make their own religion and make their own documents, they change it and say, well, Ishmael was supposed to be the one that was supposed to be sacrificed. And because it was Isaac, he stole that blessing from Ishmael. Now is where you start to see that tension gets brought over and it brews up and becomes even worse. Ishmael is considered the ancestor of the Arab people and a direct ancestor of the Prophet Muhammad. This gives Ishmael an essential place in his Islamic lineage and tradition. Like I said, Ishmael understood he was not the promised child, but his descendants believed otherwise, because by birthright, since he was born first, he should have been the promised child regardless of what happened. And that's the reason why they believe that they have a claim to the promised land as well. So just a quick foreshadowing, when we have the nations of Israel kind of breaking down and getting sold into slavery, that's the reason why the whole region becomes Muslim, because they come in and take over the land. And they say, well, if our brother's family can't take care of the region, why not his brother take care of it? If Isaac passed away and he couldn't live out the blessing, wouldn't it fall on Ishmael's shoulders to now live out that blessing? And that's how they end up getting into Israel and the promised land. And now you have both of them living in the same city and fighting over the land, which is why when we come to today, the Palestinians in Palestine, that was where the Ishmaelites and their descendants moved into. And even though it stayed there for a long time, now we're seeing the issue between Israel and Palestine fighting over the same issue right here, where now they're trying to now snuff them out, as in a sense, another Holocaust. It's really sad when you think about it. But now in Genesis 25, verse 17, we talk about Ishmael's death. He made it to 137 years, and then he dies. From here, we have the mixing of the family lines between Ishmael's descendants and descendants of the other 6 children of Abraham. And at this point is where we start to see plenty of enemies who will rise up and eventually take arms against the nation of Israel, all for various reasons, from the land, from resources, from other things like you shouldn't be here, we should be here. But the important one being about Isaac's blessing. We deserve to have that blessing. And because all of them have now aligned themselves with Ishmael, it's like a false king trying to take over another kingdom. And with that being said, any questions?
No, I mean, I had questions throughout. You answered, explaining more. Just, it's insane though, like just how it started with um Isaac and Ishmael, and well, really Abraham, and just like a seed there, and just it just built on top of each other and domino effect, So I've never understood that. Like you hear this stuff in tribes and and different nations, and but just didn't start from the beginning and know the root of it, the cause. It's just I don't even know the word for eye opening. It's like barely eye. It's like not. It's like not even touching eye opening. It's just another you know um hard to put it into words. The feeling. It's crazy though.
And this is what Bible study is here for. Like I said, I'm starting to well, it's not, I'm trying to open up that for you guys to see, because the Bible is not just inside of a book. We're living the Bible every day. And a lot of people be like, oh, the Bible is not a real book. The Bible is the first history book that we ever have that actually puts events that happen in this world in order. So even if you don't believe it as a religious book, it's still a history book. And because people don't read, let alone know their history, it's the reason why people don't realize we're still living that same history. We have people who are dying daily because of a grudge, because of one man's sin. Yet, when's the last time you heard of anybody saying this problem is here because of Abraham, or this problem is here just because Isaac and Ishmael are fighting? Nobody highlights that. Nobody talks about that. Instead, we get the Israelis are fighting the Palestinians and they're bombing the Palestinians every day. That's all we get.
Exactly. When you broke it down, I was like, yo, this is what? This is real life out here. Like,
Yeah,
there's
if I
no
can,
games.
absolutely. I think what both of you guys are touching on is super super applicable to real life, because a lot of times we limit the causation of our issues just to like what we're doing present day, or even like we'll make it about, oh well, what happened during the 1960s or in earlier times during, you know, modern slavery, and think that the evil starts there, the sin starts there, but it goes back a lot further than that.
Mm-hmm. And just to go touch back off of what Christopher's saying, who I said Christopher, Chris, we start to see that as we go further in this story. Next week, we're going to go over Jacob and Esau. Isaac is not dead yet, so we'll still be talking about Isaac moving forward, but we start to focus more on Jacob and Esau, who now, after them, the next generation will be the tribe of Israel, the 12 tribes, the tribe of Judah, Levi, Gideon, all those. And when we get to that point, we start to realize their descendants, those 12 tribes that make the whole nation of Israel, there's fighting within them as well. And that's another reason why we have the issues of what happened with the Holocaust, what happened with slavery, even for Black people, and a lot of people who claim a historical significance, but because they do not know their Bible, they're claiming certain things that doesn't pertain to them. And then you have the other people who actually are not claiming what actually does pertain to them. We have 10 tribes out of the 12 that, because of sin and false idol worship, get sold away into slavery. And not just sold away where they can come back, or if they stay together, they can still rebuild. The reason why they call them the 10 lost tribes of the Bible, only 2 of those tribes remain to this day. The rest of those 10 get scattered across the world. And the way that their captors did it, they killed the men, they took the women, anybody else who was older, they sent to a whole nother place to be slaves. They take their cities and they put and supplant other people from other races in there to completely cut off the lineage. And when that happens, you can no longer find any pure bloods from those 10 tribes. That's when you get the people who say that they're from the tribe of Israel, the family of Benjamin went to the Caribbeans, and this, that, and the third. Everybody claims to be one of the parts of the lost tribes, but whether it was true or not, because they don't read their Bible and because they don't know their history, they can't claim anything. And that's what ends up happening with the people who are running Israel today. The Israelis that are in Israel are not true Israelis. And we have the Bible telling us that this is going to happen. And not to stay too long, but the Bible does tell us that we're going to have a false group that comes into it, and it's literally happening in front of us. They claim that the Zionist Jews are a true descendant of the tribe of Judah, and that was one of the 2 tribes that stayed to this day. And because that they are descendants, they're going to move into this land that is geographically where the promised land should be. And during World War I and World War II, America and the Allied nations now gave them this land, which now caused everybody who lived there already, which were most of the Muslims and the Ishmaelite descendants, who have now already inhabited those lands for hundreds of years, have to be pushed out. Because now after World War I and World War II, we literally just put a nation and called it the nation of Israel in the middle of the Middle East. And that has caused conflict because now we literally just supplanted a whole group of people and pushed everybody else to the side. Again, not knowing our Bible causes more strife. And that's the reason behind Bible study, to continue to learn so that way we can get away from this and pray and understand where God is trying to lead us so we can avoid these potholes for ourselves and our future generations. So, with that being said, please read on. For next week, we have chapters 25, which will be the ending of this chapter. And that's going to start Jacob and Esau, verse 19 to 34. You got chapter 26, 27, 28, and 29. It is a lot, but like I said, we'll get through it like we usually do. Go ahead and get it. All right. So, any comments, any questions from anybody before we close out for tonight? Okay. Well, with that being said, Stefan, I'll let you pray us out, and then we're all good to go.
Wait, sorry. I didn't mean to. I meant to unmute and I raised my hand.
You good?
All right. Let's bow our heads, close our eyes. My Father, just want to thank you again for this time again to fellowship and to learn more about your word. Thank you for teacher Henley, for him to provide information about your word and your teachings, and for us to have a better understanding of your word. I pray that everyone has a great and safe night, to finish the Tuesday up strong. Tuesday we've never seen before, and Tuesday we'll never see again. And I pray that we continue to keep having the faith, keep fighting, keep pushing every day, with everyone on the line and those that are not on the line. Pray for also Chris Brock. He had a 29th birthday yesterday. We pray for him and for God to keep him in his new house that he purchased, and have smooth sailing with the start of his new journey in his life, new chapter. And we just continue to thank you, Lord, for allowing us to see another day. And I pray for us to have a great night and everyone to be safe. Have a great rest of the week. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Good night, guys. Thank you.
Good night. Good night.